Under. This happened to me around Labor Day. I really haven't found the wherewithal to talk too much about it until now. This is probably something I need to get off my chest because, well, you'll see. So let me think, right? It actually started the Friday of the weekend before Labor Day. Well, technically the Saturday. See, this is what working third shift technical support will get you. I wiped the sinking Monster Energy drink hangover blur from my eyes as I walked out of my call center and into the dark blue morning air. I waved goodbye to my coworkers and walked a half block to a separate parking lot. The fact was, our lot was not only small, but also not lit. No cameras, and the frequent target of vandals and break-ins. I found it much safer to park my truck between the bank overhang and a higher-end grocery store. I couldn't really take chances with it. My truck wasn't great, but it was also the most valuable thing I had. COVID, even with unemployment and stimulus checks, pretty much wiped me out, and I was behind on many things. Needless to say, repairing and replacing my truck wasn't in the cards, even the credit cards. It was Saturday of my 5 nights on before my 4 days off. Well, 5 days off with the holiday carryover. And that always meant that my mind was swimming, and traveling only the 6 miles back home to bed was going to be a struggle. I was only working since about April when things started looking good, and I still wasn't acclimated to the nights. Sometimes I'd be patting myself down for my keys while they were in my other hand when I reached my truck. Sometimes I'd hop in and forget to put it into reverse. Other times, I'd just want to nod off there until someone called the police on me. Even though I was walking a few blocks, the world was still a dull, dark blue blur through worn eyes. I got into my truck being extra careful to avoid the rusty white Toyota with a flat tire someone had left there a few days ago. The city cops apparently came around last night and slapped some orange stickers on the thing as a warning to move it. I shut my door, I started my engine, I remembered to put it in reverse. See, when you're tired like this, everything is snapshot and episodic. You don't have that connective tissue of memory tracing the last steps to the current one. So when I realized the engine was running, I eased my foot off the brake and onto the gas to pull out. That's when I heard it. It was a small jolt in the truck, and then it was a loud, visceral, shrill scream. It was so loud and so shrill, I'm still haunted by it. It was absolutely the sound of someone getting the life crushed out of them in one go. I slammed down on the brakes immediately. I was breathless and all my hair stood on end. I was starting to cry as I stepped out of the car. I just knew that I had hurt someone very badly, but I may have actually killed someone. My hands shook as I took out my phone and I hurried to the back of my truck. To my amazement and relief, there was no body. There was no one at all. I checked under and all around. I even went all around to the dark side of the grocery store and there was nothing but an overfilled dumpster and a stack of pallets. I retraced my steps all around the car, to the front of the store and to the back twice, checking for anyone, checking for a trail of blood. Nothing, and no one was around. The high-end grocery wasn't even open yet. There were no other cars but the abandoned one. By the time I stepped back into my truck, I was plenty awake now, having apparently misheard something for a scream and evidently not become involved in a double life-altering experience. I put the vehicle into reverse again, and I was surprised when my backup alarm started to go off. I mean really go off, like I was an inch or less away from backing into a house. I checked my rear view, side views, and even turned my head all the way around and saw that I had the same easy 10 feet of clearance between my truck's tail and the building I had every work morning. I pulled out and went home. Home was a small 4-story apartment building. The parking lot was empty like most Saturday mornings except for a shiny new Mustang. Since I started to come down from my adrenaline rush, I was confused by the sight of the car. And then I realized it was the landlord's car as he came walking around the far side of the building. His name was Don Smith, and he was clad in a sleeveless top that said CrossFit. That shirt and his wraparound sunglasses said the rest. He owned 4 different buildings around town he inherited from his parents. Back in the day, I heard they were okay places to be, but now, Don was on the prowl, ready to jump at any situation he felt he could exploit for double rent. His favorite was sniffing around for weed on Saturday mornings, calling the police, getting an eviction with rent, and then getting new tenants in as soon as possible. Even if it wasn't at the highest rent he could charge, he figured he was still making 175% of a year's rent off a room he'd normally only collect 100% from. Like I said, I was behind on rent from the whole COVID thing, and before you say there are programs for that, my answer to that is not if you live in a state that didn't take the money, or took the money and is now building prisons with it. Anyways, I was the last person he wanted to see. Or was I? That big smile on his face when he saw me leave my truck seemed to suggest otherwise. He stepped close enough to me that I needed to look up to him, which was almost certainly intentional on his part. He told me in no uncertain words that any slack I was getting, or perceived I was getting, was now over. You have until exactly 8 a.m., not next Saturday, but the Saturday after that. When I get back from vacation, I'm expecting the money. If I don't get it, eviction time. Are we clear? Like I said, I was getting tired again and I swallowed funny, so instead of giving him the satisfaction of choking on my words, I simply nodded and tried to move past him. He got in my way and put his arms up around me like a cage. Hey bro, have some self-respect, okay? It's all about self-respect, so let me try to teach you some, bro. Tell me you get it. I tried to answer affirmatively, but as I feared, I did cough over my words. I get it. Money in 2 weeks or eviction. He gave me 2 thumbs up before reminding me he'll cut a couple hundred off what I owe him if I see any of my neighbors with drugs. Then he got into his loud car and left. I slept a few hours, but I couldn't stay asleep. Unlike my usual worries about rent and other things, I was still unnerved by the scream I heard when I went to back out of my usual parking spot. It kept me up so much that I gave up on trying to sleep and started to do my usual chores and cooking for the weekend. It was getting to be around 5 p.m. when a deep overcast set in. In my night shift absent-mindedness, I let some chicken expire. Really expire. And I needed to get some more. I drove down to the discount store without incident to buy some chicken to replace that stuff that went bad. By the time I picked up a few other things, the clouds and night really set in. I got back into my truck and started it, put it into reverse. This time I checked my mirrors before lifting my foot away. Bright red and white taillights illuminated the space 6 feet behind me, and it was clear. But my backup alarm was going crazy again. An alarm was nothing to be worried about, but I triple-checked as I left the lot. I arrived home without further incident, but as I pulled into my usual parking spot, I noticed a strange distortion and shadow cast behind me. It looked vaguely like a small person, maybe a child, but the outline was almost shiny, like they were sheathed in a black plastic garbage bag, or maybe polished leather. The distortion only lasted a moment. I left my car in a hurry with my groceries, hoping to stay within its temporary lighting and hit the remote lock when I reached my lit porch. Maybe I got a little excited or a little scared, but as I passed away from the beam of my taillights, I tripped and took a hard fall. The fall was so unexpected that I went into a full front arm brace and tossed my groceries into the shadows. The sound of the night, the crickets, the cicadas, and the passing traffic seemed to take a deep breath and hold it. I got back up and shone my chain flashlight around I kept for dark mornings and late nights. I checked to see what I tripped on. I couldn't find anything. No divots, no holes, no rocks, no debris. I brushed off my hands and patted my head. It had been a long week, I thought to myself as I turned my light around to gather up my groceries. I found 2 out of my 3 bags intact, but the third one, the one that held the fresh chicken, it was ripped up into thin ribbons of plastic. The boneless chicken breasts were nowhere to be found. I searched around my truck with a flashlight and finally ducked under to see if it got tossed underneath. I saw nothing. I swallowed hard and told myself some hungry raccoon, cat, or something got my chicken in a split second. I also told myself I'd be having some very nice rice and broccoli without the chicken. The next day around noon, I took my garbage out, and I decided to see if I could maybe find the wrapper or styrofoam container the chicken came in around the property. I knelt down to see if anything got carried under the dumpster. As I turned around, I found something under my truck. It was a raccoon. A very dead raccoon. I didn't recall seeing a dead raccoon or anything for that matter the previous night I parked. I took a discarded cardboard tube out of the dumpster and poked the carcass into the light of day. I was immediately struck by the fact the fur was intact on top and the side, but the eyes were like someone sucked all the jelly out of a gummy bear and left the skin deflated and flapped over itself. The nose was missing, and instead, clean bone was exposed. As I prodded the poor thing with a tube, I realized it had no flesh, no muscle, no fat. It was fur that shagged apart in bone. As the fur slid off, I could see the crumpled up chicken packaging. plastic wrap and all, tucked beneath the hollow spaces between bone. I used the tube to deposit the carcass back into the trash and decided to go about my errands. Of course, this time I heard that scream again as I backed up, and my backup alarm was going nuts. As I drove, my headlights were turning on and off by themselves, and my radio tuned itself. The motorized side view mirrors motioned in circles. The final straw was the turn signals not working. I could get a ticket for that, and that's the last thing I needed. So, I decided to turn into my friend's auto shop to see if there was anything going on. It wasn't exactly in my budget, but I knew neither was a ticket, and James would charge friend prices. He was able to get me in quick, and I asked him, just out of vague curiosity, to check underneath the car as well. In 30 minutes, he came back. He didn't find anything wrong with the electrical system, nor underneath the truck. I was still out $80. I was getting frustrated with myself and my truck, as it seemed fine the rest of the trip. I got home later than expected, and it was overcast and starting to drizzle a bit. As I pulled into my parking lot, the radio started to tune itself again. The station slipped so often I could only make out but a few words as it cycled. Food, eat, meat, meat, hungry. It did this for a solid minute as I sat with my hands off the wheel and the radio. I decided against my better judgment to kneel down and take another look underneath the truck. I bent down to inspect the undercarriage in the noon shadow. I could immediately make out something that didn't belong there. At first, it looked like a dark plastic grocery bag crumpled up in between the body and the exhaust. As I turned over to get a better look, I could see the bag was slowly expanding and contracting, almost as if it were breathing. I could see strands of shiny, leathery material strung around other components. I reached up to pick off a strand, and I immediately recoiled. It burned my fingers, not because it was too hot, but because it was so cold. The bag puffed up into one large bulge the size of a grapefruit, and a cluster of 6 smaller ones inflated to the size of grapes. An X-like marking appeared on the surface, and slowly the X separated into 4 small triangles against a white surface. It took me a moment before I realized I was being seen by this thing's eye, or eyes. I was mortified, but I tried to back away slowly like I had just found a wasp nest and was trying to avoid appearing as a threat. But then, whatever it is, let out its scream. The right cuff of my flannel overshirt was nabbed by 3 of the strands. They seemed to immediately attach themselves to it and yank it further under the truck. My shirt was big enough that strands contacting the shirt was not also contacting my skin, and in quick motion I was able to pull my arm free of it. I had to spin now, with the back of my head pressed up against the bottom door of the truck so I could remove my other arm from the shirt that was quickly being sucked under the truck by that thing. As I was released from my own shirt-turned shackles, I made a mad dart for shelter only to be grabbed around the ankle, tripped, and dragged back. At first I felt coolness and numbness run from the grasping point up my leg and into my stomach, but then it was a burn, and then electricity. I tried to yelp, but nothing came out. I struggled and convulsed and succeeded only in flipping myself from my stomach to my back. I managed to get one foot up on the running boards. It occurred to me that the thing probably didn't like light, so in the few seconds it seemed to stop pulling, I was able to get my flashlight and shine it under the truck. Whatever that thing was let out its very human-like scream and then released my leg. I was able to limp back to my apartment and inspect my leg. My foot, leg, and calf were beet red and swollen to nearly gigantic proportions. I had next to no feeling below my hip and could barely bend my knee. I had to take scissors and a kitchen knife to my shoe to free my swollen foot. I slept the next 24 hours. The swelling was going down, but I still had very little feeling or control over my leg. I called off work, of course. I wasn't going anywhere near my truck, and walking was out of the question as I struggled to just move from bed to the bathroom. I ended up calling off the entire week, which probably meant I lost my job since the company had a strict policy against calling out prior to a holiday weekend. By early Friday morning, it was still dark out. I started to be able to move and coordinate my leg and foot again. I was lying in bed as I could hear Don's car pull up next to mine. I could hear him stomp through the weeds and loudly sniffing around the property one last time before leaving on his vacation. My sleep schedule was totally off, and I was still dazed and in disbelief of it all. I was out $80 cash and a week's worth of pay. I had lost my job, and I owed this asshole rent in about 5 days. On top of everything, that thing was living under my truck. Not just living, but eating. Maybe even breeding when I considered the little grape-sized things under the bigger one. It occurred to me that it probably came from that white car I parked next to. I suppose that's what I'd have to do. On a bright sunny day, drive my truck to the middle of nowhere and leave it. I could hear Don walking past my window again. He was singing softly to himself. Boats! I'm on a motherfucking boat! I listened to his door open and shut and his engine start. Then he abruptly stopped, and I heard his door swing open and his panicked feet shuffle around in the parking lot gravel. What the hell was that? I could hear him yell to no one in particular. I rolled over in bed and peeked out the window and watched Don scratch his head as he inspected the rear of his car and peered down the street both ways. I let go of the blinds, rolled over, and put a big smile on my face as I listened to him drive away for the last time. At the time of writing, Don Smith is the subject of a missing persons investigation. He was last seen at the San Aqua Marina where the vehicle was found.